The champagne flutes caught the afternoon light streaming through my parents' dining room windows, each one raised in honor of my younger sister Karen's latest promotion. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, invisible as always, watching 23 years of family mythology unfold before me like a well-rehearsed play. To Lieutenant Colonel Karen Ashford, my father declared, his voice carrying the same commanding tone that had once echoed through Fort Carson's corridors, a true credit to the Ashford legacy. The guests, a carefully curated collection of military brass, family friends, and career climbers, murmured their approval. I lifted my glass with the others, the pale liquid trembling slightly against the crystal rim, not from nerves, from restraint. My name is Lyndon Ashford, and for 23 years, my family has believed I am their greatest disappointment, the daughter who cracked under pressure at West Point, the one who walked away from duty, honor, and everything the Ashford name represented. They speak about me in hushed tones at gatherings like this, when they speak of me at all. Such a shame about Lyndon. I'd overheard my aunt whisper to a neighbor last Christmas, all that potential, just wasted. If only they knew. But the truth has a weight that civilian clothes can't hide, and secrets have a way of demanding recognition at the most unexpected moments. Tomorrow, at Karen's official promotion ceremony, the truth would finally step out of the shadows. I just didn't know it yet. The House of Silence. Growing up in Colorado Springs, our home operated like a military installation. Breakfast at 0630 hours, chores assigned with the precision of a deployment order, emotions checked at the door like weapons in a secure facility. My father, Colonel Everett Ashford, retired, had spent 30 years in Army Signal Corps, rising through ranks with methodical determination. My mother, Elena, had served as a field medic before transitioning to clinical instruction. Together, they'd built a fortress of expectations that their daughters were meant to storm and conquer. From my earliest memories, success in our house meant visibility, medals displayed prominently, achievements announced loudly. Failures, well, failures simply didn't exist in the Ashford family narrative. Karen understood this instinctively. 5 years younger than me, she possessed an innate grasp of our parents' emotional architecture. She knew exactly which accomplishments to highlight, which struggles to downplay, and how to position herself perpetually in the golden spotlight of their approval. I, on the other hand, had always been more interested in the shadows. At 18, I entered West Point with the same fierce determination that had driven every Ashford before me, the gray stone buildings, the rigid discipline, the weight of tradition. It all felt like coming home to a place I'd been preparing for my entire life. Then, after 11 months, I disappeared. No graduation, no explanation, no forwarding address. My parents' reaction was swift and surgical. My bedroom became Karen's study. My photographs migrated to dusty albums in the basement. My name became a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. She just couldn't handle the pressure. Became my father's standard explanation to curious colleagues. Some people aren't built for service. The truth, however, was far more complicated. The recruitment. 3 weeks before my planned departure from West Point, I was approached by a woman in a nondescript gray suit. She introduced herself only as Agent Morrison and asked if I'd be interested in serving my country in ways that would never appear in any official record. Your psychological profile suggests you'd be ideal for our program, she said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the coffee shop table. High intelligence, natural strategic thinking, and most importantly, comfort with anonymity. The Joint Strategic Analysis Program operated in the spaces between military branches, intelligence agencies, and diplomatic corps. We were ghosts with security clearances, advisors without titles, strategists who shaped policy from behind closed doors. For the past 22 years, I had analyzed emerging threats, modeled conflict scenarios, and advised NATO command on everything from cyber warfare to post-conflict stabilization. My recommendations had influenced decisions in Brussels, prevented crises in the Baltic states, and saved lives in ways I could never discuss at dinner parties. I'd worked alongside generals and cabinet secretaries, briefed foreign ministers and defense contractors. My security clearance was higher than my father's had ever been, my responsibilities greater than anything Karen had yet achieved. But in my family's narrative, I remained the daughter who'd quit, the one who'd failed to follow through, the cautionary tale about what happens when an Ashford loses her nerve. The ceremony. The auditorium at Fort Carson buzzed with the familiar energy of military pageantry, dress uniforms pressed to perfection, medals gleaming under fluorescent lights, family members arranging themselves in order of importance and relation to the guest of honor. I'd chosen my seat carefully, third row from the back, partially obscured by a support column, close enough to observe, far enough to remain invisible. It was a skill I'd perfected over decades of professional anonymity. Karen took the podium like she'd been born for it. Her uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and badge positioned with mathematical precision. She embodied everything our parents had dreamed their daughters would become: confident, accomplished, publicly celebrated. Her speech was polished, hitting all the expected notes about duty, sacrifice, and the honor of service. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. "Throughout my career," Karen said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "I've learned to recognize the difference between those who truly honor the uniform and those who walk away from it when the pressure becomes too great." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. I felt the familiar sting, but after 23 years, I'd developed immunity to such casual cruelty. I'd learned long ago that the most dangerous wounds were often self-inflicted. Then the auditorium doors opened with a soft pneumatic hiss. The change in atmosphere was immediate and unmistakable. Conversation ceased mid-sentence, postures straightened, even the flag in the corner seemed to hang more proudly. General Nathaniel Merrill entered the room like weather, inevitable, commanding, impossible to ignore, 4 stars on his shoulders, ribbons covering the left side of his chest in a testament to 4 decades of distinguished service. I knew him well. We'd worked together on 3 separate assignments, including the delicate negotiations that had prevented a diplomatic crisis in Estonia. His pale blue eyes swept the audience with practiced efficiency, cataloging faces and assessing threats with the automatic precision of a career soldier. Then his gaze found mine. Recognition flickered across his weathered features. His spine straightened further, which I hadn't thought possible. Without hesitation, he changed course and began walking directly toward my section. The auditorium fell silent except for the measured strike of his dress shoes against polished concrete. Each step echoed like a countdown to revelation. When he reached my row, he stopped, turned to face me fully, and then, in full view of 300 military personnel and their families, General Nathaniel Merrill raised his right hand and delivered a crisp, formal salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent auditorium, "General Advisor Ashford, it's an honor to see you again." The words hit the room like a detonation. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath from the front row, saw my father half rise from his seat, confusion and recognition warring across his weathered features, watched Karen's composure crack like ice under sudden pressure. I stood slowly, returning the salute with the same precision I'd learned in briefing rooms from Brussels to Ankara. "General Merrill," I replied, my voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Always a privilege." Around us, whispers bloomed like wildfire. "Did he say General Advisor? I thought she left West Point." "That's the woman from the Baltic situation. The one who prevented the Cyprus incident." Karen tried to continue her speech, but the rhythm was broken. The spotlight had shifted, and for the first time in that auditorium, the audience was looking at someone other than the guest of honor. They were looking at me. The ghost. The failure. The sister who'd walked away. Except I hadn't walked away at all. I'd simply learned to serve in the shadows, where the most important work was often done by people whose names would never appear in official histories. The reckoning. The ceremony ended in confused applause and hurried conversations. I found myself surrounded by officers I'd worked with over the years, each offering quiet words of recognition and respect. It was surreal. After decades of anonymity, suddenly being visible felt like stepping into bright sunlight after years underground. Karen found me near the exit, her composure restored but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You let me stand up there," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You let me say those things about you." I studied her face, so familiar, yet in this moment, belonging to a stranger. "What would you have had me do? Interrupt your moment to defend myself against assumptions you chose to make?" "I didn't know," she whispered. "How could I know? You could have asked," I replied simply. "Any time in the last 23 years, you could have asked." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 decades pressing between us like physical force. "I found something," Karen said finally, pulling an envelope from her jacket. "When I was cleaning out Dad's old files for his security clearance renewal. I think you should see this." Inside was a letter, yellowed with age and bearing the official seal of the Department of Defense. It was addressed to my parents and dated 3 months after I'd left West Point. The contents were brief but devastating. We regret that we cannot provide details regarding your daughter's current assignment due to classification requirements. Please be assured that Lieutenant Ashford is serving her country with distinction in a capacity that requires absolute discretion. Any inquiries regarding her status should be directed through official channels. It was signed by a Deputy Assistant Secretary whose name I recognized, the same man who'd eventually become Secretary of Defense. They knew, Karen said, her voice barely audible. They've known all along that you were still serving. They chose to believe something different. I folded the letter carefully and handed it back to her. Sometimes people prefer the fiction that supports their worldview over the truth that challenges it. The family reunion. That evening, our parents hosted a small reception at their home. The same dining room where I'd sat invisible for years now buzzed with conversations about my career, my service, my contributions to national security. Officers who'd worked with me shared stories I'd never thought they'd remember. Colleagues praised operations I'd thought were long forgotten. My father approached me as the evening wound down. For the first time in decades, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. Lyndon, he said, using my full name instead of the casual Lynn he'd adopted when I became a disappointment. I owe you an apology. I waited. I served for 30 years, he continued, and I thought I understood what service looked like. But you've been serving at a level I never reached, in ways I never imagined. And I was too proud to see it. I couldn't tell you, I said quietly. The work required anonymity. It still does. He nodded, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. But we should have trusted you. We should have known that our daughter, any daughter we raised, wouldn't simply quit when things got difficult. My mother appeared beside him, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. Can you forgive us? She asked. Can you forgive me? For 23 years, I'd imagined this moment. I'd rehearsed the speeches I'd give, the vindication I'd claim, the righteous anger I'd finally express. But standing there, looking at my parents, older now, humbled by revelation, genuinely remorseful, I found that anger had transformed into something softer. There's nothing to forgive, I said finally. You loved Karen openly because her service was visible. I chose a path that required invisibility. That wasn't your failure, it was simply the cost of the work I felt called to do. The new chapter. 6 months later, I stood before a congressional committee, providing testimony about emerging security threats. My service was no longer classified, changing global dynamics had made transparency more valuable than anonymity. In the gallery, my family sat in the front row. Karen in her dress uniform, my parents wearing their best civilian clothes, all of them beaming with pride that was finally, publicly expressed. After the hearing, we walked together through Washington's spring green streets, past monuments to other invisible servants who'd shaped history from behind the scenes. I have a question, Karen said as we paused before the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. All those years when we celebrated my promotions, my achievements, did it hurt? Sitting there, knowing what you'd accomplished while we ignored it? I considered the question carefully. Sometimes, I admitted. But I also learned something valuable about service. The most important victories aren't the ones that get you promoted or celebrated. They're the ones that save lives, prevent conflicts, make the world safer in ways no one will ever know about. I touched her arm gently. Your service matters too, Karen. Leading soldiers, inspiring junior officers, representing our military publicly, that's vital work. We just serve different functions in the same mission. That evening, our family took a new photograph. This time, everyone was in the frame. No one was cropped out, no one was forgotten, no one was reduced to a cautionary tale about failure. Later, as I prepared to leave for another assignment, this one requiring my real name and public acknowledgement, my mother handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple silver frame containing the original family photograph from which I'd been edited years ago. Below it, in her careful handwriting, was a note, to our daughter, who served in the shadows so others could stand in the light. We're sorry it took us so long to see you. As I boarded the plane for my next assignment, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me full circle. For 23 years, I'd been a ghost in my own family story. Now, finally, I was ready to be visible again. But I'd learned something valuable in those shadow years. Sometimes the most important service happens when no one's watching. Sometimes the greatest courage is displayed in silence. And sometimes, the most powerful victories are the ones that never make the headlines. The plane lifted off into the evening sky, carrying me toward another mission, another challenge, another opportunity to serve, this time, with my family finally understanding the true meaning of the Ashford legacy.